It was a typical Monday morning. I sat at my desk, nursing a lukewarm coffee and sifting through the deluge of weekend emails. Among them was a company-wide announcement from HR about the upcoming team-building retreat, a mandatory event filled with trust falls and forced camaraderie. The kind of event that made my introverted self cringe. Feeling a mix of sarcasm and frustration, I hit reply all instead of reply. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I typed a snarky comment about the retreat and, unfortunately, a not-so-flattering remark about my manager, Mr. Thompson. I intended it as a private joke to a colleague, but the moment I clicked send, horror washed over me. The realization hit like a freight train. I had just sent a disparaging email about my boss to the entire company. Panic set in as I considered the ramifications. Would I be fired? Would I ever be able to show my face at work again? I spent the rest of the day in a haze, awaiting the inevitable fallout. Colleagues avoided eye contact, and whispers followed me through the office. When I finally mustered the courage to check my inbox, there was a meeting request from Mr. Thompson for the next morning. Sleep eluded me that night as I rehearsed apologies and contemplated worst-case scenarios. The weight of my mistake pressed heavily on my chest, and I couldn't help but reflect on the deeper issues that had led to this moment: my constant need for validation, the unresolved tensions with authority figures, and the lingering guilt from past missteps. I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Not because I was eager to work, but because the idea of walking through a half-empty office felt slightly less suffocating than enduring the full hallway parade of tight smiles and withheld judgment. Mr. Thompson's meeting invite had no description. Just the subject line. Let's talk. I sat in the break room pretending to drink tea I hadn't steeped properly. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like tiny insects, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between my thoughts. Every 5 minutes, I checked the time. The meeting wasn't until 9:30. It was 7:52. I stared at the mug in my hand, a novelty one from my sister that read, "Professional Overthinker." She'd given it to me half-jokingly. But in moments like this, it felt like a diagnosis. At 9:27, I walked to Mr. Thompson's office, my footsteps sounding louder than usual on the cheap carpet. His door was closed. I hovered outside for a second, then knocked once, soft, like maybe I didn't want him to hear. "Come in." His voice was steady. Not cold, but not warm either. He gestured to the chair across from his desk without looking up. I sat. He finally looked at me. He didn't have the paper from the email printed out or pulled up, which somehow made it worse. "You probably know why we're meeting," he said. I nodded. My throat was dry. I assumed the email was accidental? "It was," I said quickly. "I meant to send it to Micah. It wasn't supposed to." "I know who you meant to send it to." He said it calmly. Not accusing, just tired. This was a box he didn't want to check either. I opened my mouth, then closed it. He folded his hands. "Look. I've been in this field for 20 years. I've seen all kinds of things. Accidental reply-alls, Slack meltdowns. Someone once forwarded me a dating profile they meant to send to their roommate. These things happen. And if I were the kind of boss who led with fear, you'd be walking out of this meeting with a cardboard box and a thin folder." I looked down at my hands. They were clenched in my lap. "But I'm not that kind of boss," he continued. "I don't think you meant to humiliate me. I think you're frustrated. And frankly, the team-building retreats are a waste of time." I looked up. That caught me off guard. He gave a half-smile. Not amused, more like resigned. "That said, we need to address it. Public disrespect, even accidental, leaves a mark. People look at me differently now. And they're not sure if they trust you." I swallowed hard. "I understand. And I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have." "I know." There was a long pause. He leaned back in his chair and looked past me, out the window. "Why'd you write it?" That landed heavier than I expected. Honestly? I was tired. I was annoyed. It felt performative. The retreat. The forced enthusiasm. And sometimes I feel like... I stopped myself. He waited. I'm expected to smile through it, even when things feel off. And I guess it boiled over. He nodded slowly. "That's fair. But you need to understand something. Your words matter, even in private. Especially when you think no one's listening." That hit a nerve. I didn't mean it the way it sounded, I added. He raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? That shut me up. We ended the meeting with an agreement. I'd write a public apology to the team. Not groveling, but acknowledging. He wouldn't escalate it to HR. In return, he expected more transparency, not just with him, but with myself. I didn't know what that meant, but I nodded anyway. You're a good employee, he said as I left. But being good isn't enough if no one knows where you stand. That sentence would live in my head for days. When I got back to my desk, there was a sticky note on my keyboard. Coffee at 3? Micah. I looked over and saw him already watching me, eyebrows raised in that half-teasing way he always did. Micah was the only person I'd ever trusted enough to vent to in this place. Not just about Mr. Thompson, but about everything, the passive-aggressive group chats, the forced fun lunches, the unspoken hierarchy that favored polished loudness over quiet competence. I nodded. At 3 o'clock, we met by the side exit and walked to the cafe 2 blocks down. It was small and over-decorated with fake ivy and motivational posters, but it had bad lighting and good espresso, which somehow made it feel honest. Micah didn't say anything for the first 5 minutes. He just handed me my usual order and sat with me in the far corner, where the seat sagged a little and the music was just loud enough to make confessions feel distant. You okay? He finally asked. I gave a hollow laugh. Define okay. He shrugged. Not fired. Not crying. Somewhere on the somewhere. We sipped our drinks. He tapped the side of his cup. You're not wrong, by the way. About the retreats. Or Thompson. Or the way this place runs on image. I looked at him. So why'd you never say it? He shrugged. I did. Just quieter. And never in writing. On the way back to the office, he hesitated before we re-entered. You ever think about quitting? That stopped me. I didn't answer. Because the truth was, yes. But not just because of this. Because I'd been carrying something long before the email. That night, I drafted the apology. It started stiff, formal. Dear team, I want to take a moment to acknowledge. I deleted it. Tried again. I made a mistake this week that. Deleted. Eventually, I just wrote. Hi everyone. I owe you all an apology. I said something I shouldn't have, and worse, I said it where you could all see it. I meant it as a private complaint. That doesn't excuse it. We're all trying. I forgot that. I'll try harder to remember. I sat with it for a while. Then sent it. Not because it solved anything, but because it was honest. And the weirdest part? Some people replied. Not publicly. Just quiet messages. Hey. I've felt the same way. Thanks for saying it, even if you didn't mean to. That took guts. I didn't know what to do with that. So I saved them. In a folder called Things I Meant. The morning after the apology, the office was different. No overt change. No marching band announcing my fall from grace. No HR rep dragging me into a beige room to discuss tone and professionalism. But the air had shifted. It was in the way people greeted me or didn't. In the extra second of eye contact that said, I read it, even when they said nothing. In how conversations paused as I walked by, just long enough for me to notice. The silence wasn't hostile. It was careful. Everyone was walking around a coffee spill no one wanted to mop up. By mid-morning, I realized how few people had replied to the apology. There were the 3 quiet DMs from yesterday, a few likes on the email. That was it. Which made the hallway whispering feel louder. People say a lot of things in private. You just had the bad luck of being overheard. He said it without judgment. Just stating a truth. What you do now matters more than what you said, he added. And with that, he returned to feedback on a pitch deck as if we hadn't just quietly acknowledged that I dragged him in front of the whole company. Later that day, I reopened a draft email to my sister that I'd started a week ago. Subject, catching up, and maybe venting a little. I'd written 2 lines. Hey. I know we haven't talked much. Things have been weird. Work is complicated. I stared at it. Deleted the word weird. Replaced it with messy. Then back to weird. I didn't send it. Not because I didn't want to. But because I wasn't ready for her response, a sister who had climbed the ladder faster, smoother, louder. She'd never rubbed it in, not directly. But every compliment she got from our parents landed like a reminder, she was the one who did it right. The closer. And I wrote venting emails I couldn't unsend. Micah invited me for drinks that evening with some of the others. Casual, he said. No forced fun. No metaphors. I hesitated. I'm not exactly employee of the month right now. He grinned. No one there wants to be either. We met at a dive bar 4 blocks from the office. Dim lights, scuffed floors, a bartender who looked like she'd seen too many tech workers try to flirt badly. Maria was already there, playing pool with someone from IT whose name I never remembered. Micah handed me a beer, already halfway into one himself. You survived the week, he said. Barely. You didn't cry in the stairwell though. That's worth something. I laughed, surprised. The beer helped. So did the noise. The way it filled the gaps. So did the people. Not warm, exactly, but real. And that felt safer than friendliness. At some point in the evening, Maria leaned in over the sticky table and said, You know what your email did? I looked up, bracing. It reminded everyone that they're pretending too. I blinked. I didn't mean to make a point. She shrugged. Doesn't mean you didn't. Back home, I lay on the couch with Poppy curled at my feet. Not the dog from the last story, Poppy is a plant. A stubborn one. I named her after a character from a book I never finished. She was the only living thing in my apartment I didn't regularly disappoint. I opened a blank document, typed, Things I Meant, Volume 2, and added, I'm not always kind. But I don't want to be cruel. I want to be understood. I stared at the sentence, then saved the file. I didn't know it then, but the email, that one stupid, impulsive mistake, had started something. Not a revolution. Not redemption. Just honesty. A crack. A place to look through. And maybe, eventually, walk through. But not yet. First, I had to look. My mom called the next morning, just after 10 a.m. It was a Saturday, but she still sounded like she'd been up for hours, running errands no one asked her to run. Just checking in, she said, in that way that meant something was wrong. I hadn't told her about the email, hadn't told anyone in my family. You sound tired, she added. I was. But not in a way sleep could fix. Long week, I said. Work? A few things happened. She paused. Your sister said something similar. Said the energy at her firm has been off. Maybe it's a generational thing. Too much openness. Everyone oversharing instead of doing the work. I stared at the ceiling. There it was. That specific brand of maternal judgment, disguised as social commentary, aimed like a dart. Maybe people are just burned out, I said. Well, that too. But not everything needs to be processed out loud. I almost laughed. If only she knew. But of course, I didn't say anything. I never really did. After the call, I sat on the couch and watched the morning sunlight shift across the floorboards. The quiet of the apartment was comforting, but also revealing. It echoed. I picked up my phone, hovered over my sister's name. Danny. She hadn't texted me in weeks. Not out of malice. Just life. She was always in motion, new job, new clients, new city, new yoga certification. Our last text exchange was me asking for a book recommendation. She'd replied, just read something with characters who go outside. At the time, I'd laughed. Now it felt like a dig. I started typing. Hey, weird question. Did mom say something to you about work? Then deleted it. Instead, I typed, want to do lunch this week? She replied 7 minutes later. Sure. But I picked the place. You always choose places with fluorescent lighting and sad sandwiches. Deal. That night, I opened the folder on my laptop labeled drafts. Inside, 27 unsent emails. Some short. Some like essays. Some to exes. One to an old professor. One to myself. I clicked on the one titled to Mr. Thompson, the version I won't send. The body read, you don't know what it's like to feel invisible until you finally say something loud and wrong and everyone turns to look. And then all you want is to disappear again. I added a line. I'm not afraid of being seen. I'm afraid of being seen the wrong way. Then closed it again. On Tuesday, I met Danny for lunch at a tiny Vietnamese spot with 5 tables and too many plants. She was already there when I arrived, typing on her phone with the kind of intensity that said deadline and please let me finish this one thing. She looked up and smiled. You look like you haven't slept. Thanks. No, emotionally. I laughed. That's worse. We ordered. She didn't ask about work right away, which I appreciated. Instead, she talked about her new apartment, her therapist, and a guy she'd dated twice and already ghosted. He chewed too loud, she said. Wow. No, I mean like, existentially, he was chewing his feelings. I snorted into my drink. Eventually, she leaned forward. So what's up? You don't usually initiate lunch. I shrugged. Just been thinking. About? Mistakes, visibility, family scripts, office politics, accidentally replying all to an entire company and dragging your manager in the process. She blinked. Sorry, what? I told her. Not all the details, but enough. When I was done, she stared at me, then said, I'm weirdly proud of you. I gave her a look. For screwing up? For saying something real. Even if it blew up. She sipped her drink. You've always been the polite one. The one who drafts instead of says. Maybe this was overdue. That's one way to look at it. She tilted her head. You know, you sound just like Dad when you talk about Thompson. I froze. How? Like someone who got everything the hard way and now expects everyone else to prove they're worth listening to. I sat back. It wasn't an accusation. Just a mirror. I hated that about him, I said. I know. She reached over and touched my wrist, a rare gesture from her. So don't become him. After lunch, I walked back to the office slower than usual. Not because I was avoiding work. But because her words clung to me like fog. Don't become him. I'd spent years trying to undo his voice in my head, that persistent sense that anything less than perfection was failure. And yet, here I was. Replaying the way Mr. Thompson had looked at me. Measured. Disappointed. Too familiar. Back at my desk, I found a note tucked under my keyboard. Handwritten. You said what a lot of us think. We just didn't have the guts or the typo to say it out loud. Thanks for taking the hit. No name. I stared at it. Folded it once. Slipped it into my wallet. That night, I texted Danny. Thanks for lunch. And for being more honest than I wanted. She replied, anytime. Even when you don't want it. Then added. Also, chew louder. You've earned it. Later, I opened the things I meant file. Added. Sometimes the mistake is the most honest thing we say all week. And underneath that, sometimes you have to hit send just to see what happens next. On Wednesday morning, the office microwave exploded. Not in the dramatic sense, no flames, no sirens. But it made a pop loud enough to silence the entire floor, followed by the unmistakable smell of scorched butter and plastic. It was oddly symbolic. People gathered around the break room like mourners at a wake. The death of shared lunches and leftover pad thai. Someone taped a handwritten sign to the door that said, simply, retired. Mr. Thompson passed by, glanced inside, and without pausing said, that thing's been dying slowly for months. We just didn't listen. A few people laughed, nervously. I didn't. Because it wasn't just about the microwave. Later that morning, I had to sit in on a creative review, not my usual domain. We were supposed to give live feedback on a pitch for a client I barely interacted with. The presenter, Ethan, was a junior copywriter with too many ideas and not enough restraint. He was nervous. His voice trembled. And halfway through, he apologized for a slide that hadn't loaded correctly. Twice. The rest of the room nodded politely, checked their phones, or stared with bored professionalism. Mr. Thompson stayed silent, arms folded, jaw tight. I saw Ethan's fingers shake slightly as he clicked to the next slide. And without thinking, I spoke. I like that headline. The one on slide 3. There's something clean about it. Confident without being loud. Everyone turned. Mr. Thompson included. Ethan looked up, surprised. Thanks, he said, a little too fast. I nodded. And the meeting moved on. Later, in the hallway, Ethan stopped me. Hey. Thanks for, earlier. I shrugged. You were doing fine. I just didn't want you to think you weren't. He looked like he wanted to say more. But instead, he smiled, small and grateful. It helped. And then he walked away. That stuck with me more than I expected. That evening, Micah and I stayed late finishing up edits on a case study. We weren't talking much, just passing notes and line edits back and forth like some corporate version of 6th grade lab partners. At one point, he glanced up and said, "You've changed a little." I paused. "Since the email? You're less, airlock Y. Airlock Y. You used to say things through 10 layers of filter. Now it's 7. I laughed. Huge improvement. He looked at me. I think people notice that you're being more real. Even if they don't say it. Or they just think I'm a ticking time bomb. Maybe. But at least you're taking honestly. I sat with that. Then said, "You ever think about what we're actually doing here?" He raised an eyebrow. "At work?" "Yeah. Like, this whole system. The structure. The hierarchies. The way we dance around honesty because we're too afraid to offend or be seen." He leaned back. "That's a lot of thought for 9:45 on a Wednesday." "Sorry." He shook his head. "Don't apologize. That's what I mean. You never used to ask stuff like that out loud." The next morning, I found Mr. Thompson in the hallway by the coffee station. He was pouring sugar into his mug like he was building a sandcastle. I hovered. He looked up, sensing me. "You want something?" "No, yeah. Kind of." He raised an eyebrow. I cleared my throat. "I've been thinking about what you said in our meeting. About transparency. About words meaning more than we think." He said nothing, just sipped his coffee. "I've also been thinking that maybe you're not as terrible as I said in that email." A pause. He smiled, barely. "That's generous." I continued. "I think we both care about the work. We just communicate differently." He leaned against the counter. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "When I read that email, I wasn't angry. I was relieved. That caught me off guard." Relieved? I knew people were frustrated. I could feel it. But no one ever says it. And when you don't hear it, you can't fix it. You just feel it in the silence. In missed deadlines. In the fake laughs at forced fun. He looked down into his mug. "Your email hurt, yeah. But it was real." He looked up at me again. "It was also earned." I blinked. He walked off, coffee in hand. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't a villain. He was tired, too. Just differently. At lunch, I sat in the atrium with Maria. We weren't talking, just eating in parallel. At one point, she pulled a book from her bag and handed it to me. "For your folder." I looked at it, a slim novel called Things We Leave Unsaid. "It's slow," she said. "Glacial. But the kind of slow that grows on you." "Like this job?" She smiled. "Exactly." I took it. Didn't open it. Just held it. Sometimes, that's enough. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off. The only glow came from my laptop, open to a blank page. I typed. "We build whole lives around what we don't say. We call it professionalism. We call it manners. But maybe it's just fear. Maybe if we all said one true thing a day, one sentence that cost us nothing but meant something, this whole structure might breathe better." I stared at it. Then added it to the things I meant file. And for once, I didn't delete a word. Sunday lunch at my parents' place had always been its own kind of performance. Roast chicken, soft jazz playing from the same Bluetooth speaker since 2017. My dad at the head of the table, carving meat with too much precision. My mom flitting in and out with dishes she insisted weren't nothing fancy, though she'd spent the whole morning making them. And then there was Danny, showing up slightly late, glowing with curated chaos, telling stories like they were episodes of a show we all should have subscribed to. I came on time. Always. Which somehow still made me feel late. "You've lost weight," my mom said, by way of hello. I smiled tightly. "New cardio routine," I said. That was a lie. My cardio lately had been mostly emotional. At the table, we passed dishes with automatic rhythm. Salt, salad, bread. Small talk hummed like white noise. Eventually, my dad asked, "So, how's work?" He didn't look up when he said it. Just kept spooning gravy like it was data he needed to organize. "Fine," I said. Danny jumped in, talking about a new project, a big client, something that involved a rooftop drone shoot. My mom clapped her hands. "You always bring the coolest stories." I nodded. I didn't have a rooftop drone story. Just an accidental email and a folder of things I meant. After dessert, Danny and I stood at the sink doing dishes, one of the few traditions that had survived the years intact. She bumped me lightly with her shoulder. "You gonna tell them?" "About what?" She looked at me knowingly. "You know what?" "No." "What would be the point? Maybe they'd surprise you." "Maybe I'd rather not be disappointed again." She didn't press, just handed me a wet plate. The next day at work, something strange happened. Thompson and I were in a meeting with a client who, to put it diplomatically, had the self-awareness of a brick. She kept cutting people off, mispronouncing names, talking over junior staff like they were decorative. At one point, she said to Ethan, "You're just the note-taker, right?" Ethan flushed, but nodded. And then, quietly but firmly, Mr. Thompson said, "Actually, Ethan leads the copy on this campaign. He's the reason the tone works. So if you want to adjust anything, you'll want to talk to him directly." The woman blinked, then nodded stiffly, and moved on. After the call, Ethan shot me a look across the table. Not grateful. Not stunned. Just a flicker of something that looked like, maybe he's not who I thought. I wasn't sure who he meant, Thompson. Or me. That evening, I stayed late again. Not to work. Just to sit. Think. Right, maybe. Micah came by with 2 iced teas from the weird vending machine in the lobby that only accepted Apple Pay and moral compromise. "Can I say something?" he asked. "Always. You've been different lately. You've said that before. But it's like, before, you were trying to keep things from spilling. Now you're letting things fall and just seeing where they land." I took a sip. "That sounds dangerous." "It's more honest." I looked at him. "Do you ever feel like we're all just pretending we like this job more than we do?" "Daily. And yet we stay. Maybe not forever." He said it like someone who already had a foot out the door. I didn't ask. Some things you let breathe. I walked home that night. No music, just the rhythm of my steps and the city hum. I passed a man sitting on the curb, eating noodles out of a paper box with 2 small chopsticks. He looked up as I passed and said, "You look like you're carrying a conversation you haven't had yet." I blinked. He smiled. "I'm serious. You look like a prequel." I laughed, startled. "Is that good or bad?" "Depends. You the kind who talks eventually?" I didn't answer. Just kept walking. But the sentence stayed. A conversation I haven't had yet. Back home, I opened my email. No new messages. Except one. From Danny. Subject line was thinking. Body. What if you told Dad the truth? Not for him. For you. No punctuation. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. Didn't reply. But opened a blank message. Addressed it to my father. Typed, "There's a story I didn't tell at lunch." Deleted it. Tried again. "You asked about work. The truth is, I made a mistake. A big one. I embarrassed myself. I embarrassed my boss. And somehow, it made everything clearer. I realized how much I'd been trying to be someone you'd approve of. And how exhausting that is." Paused. Deleted that, too. New line. "We don't have to talk about it. But I wanted you to know." I stared at it. Then hit save. Not send. Just save. One day, maybe. Not today. But I'd said it. At least to myself. Later that night, I pulled out my things I meant file. Added. The hardest part isn't what we say. It's what we want to say but think no one will hear right. And below that, you can't build a life around being unnoticeable. I closed the file, sat in the dark. Let the stillness sit beside me, not inside me. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. The next all-hands meeting was Thursday at 3 p.m. Mandatory attendance. Agenda, culture, values, and team cohesion going forward. Which, in office speak, usually translates to, we're trying to remind everyone we care, even if it doesn't feel like it. I sat in the back, like I always did. Not quite hiding. But definitely not centering myself. Mr. Thompson stood at the front of the room, flanked by HR and two people I'd only seen in emails. Someone had prepared a slideshow. It included phrases like authentic leadership and psychological safety in fonts too rounded to feel sincere. He spoke for a while. And I'll say this, he tried. He acknowledged that people had been feeling disconnected, that some communication had faltered, that a certain email, which he didn't name, thank God, had surfaced deeper issues worth talking about. People nodded. Politely. But the air didn't shift. Not really. Because everyone was still waiting for someone else to go first. After the meeting, I found myself in the kitchen with Maria. She was staring into the fridge like it had personally offended her. I think that hummus has been here since the last rebrand, she said. I looked. It was, in fact, sentient. How's your cohesion going? I asked. She snorted. I always feel closest to people when they're forced to clap for a stock photo of a handshake. She shut the fridge. You ever feel like this place is trying to have a feeling without ever earning it? I thought about it. Then nodded. That night, I walked home with a weight I couldn't quite name. It wasn't dread. Or guilt. Just compression. Like the air was pressing slightly harder than usual against my chest. I stopped at a corner bodega and bought a notebook. Not a digital one. Not a Google document. A real one. Paper. Blue cover. Soft spine. At home, I wrote one sentence on the first page. I'm tired of the version of me that always waits to speak. Then closed it. That felt like enough. The next morning, Micah messaged me on Slack. You free after lunch? I need a sanity check on the Archer proposal. I was. But also, not really. My head was in a different place. Still, I said yes. Because that's what we do, right? We show up, even when we're split in two. We sat at his desk. He walked me through the pitch. Halfway through, I zoned out. Not out of boredom. Just drift. My thoughts kept circling the same question. What would I say if I didn't care how it landed? Micah paused. I blinked. Just thinking. He studied me. Then said. You've got something brewing, don't you? What do you mean? I know that look. I'm about to say something that'll probably change something look. I shrugged. I don't know if it'll change anything. I'm not even sure I want it to. He leaned back. You ever think maybe that email, the accidental one, wasn't the mistake? It felt like one. Yeah, but maybe the real mistake was assuming it had to be private in the first place. That stuck. That afternoon, I drafted another email. Not to Mr. Thompson. Not to HR. To the whole team. Another reply all. But this time, on purpose. Hi everyone. I've been thinking a lot about this past month. About what we say out loud, and what we don't. When I made that mistake, the first one, I was embarrassed. But I was also frustrated. Because the things I said, even if poorly worded, came from a real place. And based on what some of you have shared with me since, I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. I don't want to live in a workplace where we pretend everything's fine just to keep the peace. I'd rather stumble toward honesty than keep dancing around it. So here's my ask, let's talk. Really talk. Not perform. Not posture. Just speak. If you want to. If you're ready. I'll be in the second floor lounge at 4 p.m. today. No pressure. No agenda. Just space. I stared at it. Hovered over send. Then clicked it. Just like that. No breath holding this time. At 4 p.m., I sat alone in the second floor lounge. It was quiet. Too quiet. I checked my phone. Thought about pretending to scroll. But didn't. I wanted to feel whatever came next without cushioning it.
At 4:07, Maria walked in with a granola bar and sat next to me without saying anything. At 4:09, Ethan showed up, looking unsure. Then one of the new hires. Then Micah. Then someone I didn't know by name. No one said anything at first. We just sat. Like a weird support group that forgot the theme. Eventually, Maria spoke. So, is this the part where we all cry? Someone laughed. And somehow, that opened the door. We talked. Not loudly. Not in bullet points. But slowly. About burnout. About how meetings eat up our days. About how silence doesn't equal safety. No one blamed anyone. We just let the words rise and land. I walked home that night feeling like I'd done something irreversible. Not wrong. But irreversible. And for the first time, that felt okay. That night, I wrote in my notebook. Maybe honesty doesn't fix things. But it makes them real. And that's a start. Then turned off my phone. And slept. Hard. I went home that weekend for my dad's birthday, nothing big. Just a family dinner. Cake from the same bakery since I was 12. He didn't like fuss. He liked predictability, things that stayed where he put them. I brought a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce and didn't particularly like, but it looked respectable. Danny was already there when I arrived, feet curled under her on the couch like she lived there again. Our mom fluttered in and out of the kitchen in a too-clean apron, humming a song no one could place. My dad was at the dining table, organizing some unpaid bills into stacks like they were war strategies. He didn't look up right away. When he did, he just nodded. "You're early. You're welcome." Dinner was baked ziti, garlic bread, salad with too many onions. My dad didn't like onions. My mom said she forgot. We all knew she didn't. Halfway through, Danny asked, "So, how's work, everyone?" I froze slightly. But before I could respond, my dad launched into a monologue about corporate bloat, incompetent managers, and how no one has loyalty anymore. If someone had sent a message like that in my day, they'd be out before the end of lunch. I blinked. "What message?" He waved a hand. "Doesn't matter. Just saying. People forget who pays them. Think they're owed explanations." My mom cleared her throat. Danny met my eyes across the table. Her expression said, "You don't owe him anything." Still, something in me snapped. Maybe people don't want to just be paid. Maybe they want to be heard. He raised an eyebrow. Heard? In a company? It's not therapy. It's a job. Maybe that's the problem. The room went quiet. He leaned back, fork down. "You sound like someone who doesn't understand how things work. And you sound like someone who never asked if they could work better." Another silence. This one different. Heavy. Then he stood and left the table. Didn't slam a door. Didn't yell. Just left. As if that was still his best trick. After dinner, Danny found me on the porch. She handed me a glass of wine and sat beside me on the wooden bench that groaned with memory. That was a moment. "You okay?" I stared out at the street. "I'm just tired of pretending." She sipped her wine. "Pretending what?" "That I'm okay with being the quiet one. The good one. The one who listens instead of speaks. You're not quiet anymore. I think I'm just done waiting for permission." She looked at me. "He won't apologize. I know. He thinks silence is strength." I nodded. "That's what scares me. I used to think so too." The next morning, before I left, my dad found me in the hallway. He didn't say sorry. He didn't mention the dinner. He just said, "The thing you said about work. About being heard. That ever actually change anything?" I paused. "I don't know yet." "HM. He nodded, then walked away. And weirdly, that felt like progress. Back in the city, I returned to an office that felt fractionally different. People were making eye contact longer. Not smiling more. But more real. Ethan dropped by my desk with a sticky note that said, "I told my roommate about the 4 p.m. thing." She cried. "Not sure why I'm telling you that." Micah sent me a message. "New kid from Calms wants to do a second round." I told him it's BYO honesty. Even Mr. Thompson, in passing, said, "Brave thing you did." Just that. Nothing more. And yet, it meant something. Because we all knew what wasn't being said. That something had shifted. That something still might break. But for now, it held. That night, I finally sent the email to my dad. The one I'd saved. I didn't overthink it. Didn't reread it 5 times. Just hit send. The subject line read, "The story I didn't tell at dinner." No reply came that night. None the next day either. But 3 days later, I got a message from an unknown number. I read it. "I don't know how to talk about that stuff. But I'm glad you do." I didn't save the number. But I didn't delete the message either. I just reread it once. Then once more. Then closed my phone and sat with the feeling that maybe the silence between us had never been empty. Just waiting. Just scared. Just inherited. Later, I opened my notebook. Wrote, "We learn silence like a second language. But unlearning it, that's what makes a story." And below it, "Some people apologize with absence, others with presence. Both are imperfect. But sometimes, they're all we get." I closed the book, exhaled, and felt, for the first time in a long time, that something inside me had unclenched. Not resolved. Not forgiven. Just looser. Like a muscle I'd stopped bracing. By the following Monday, the air at work felt lighter. Not better. Not easier. Just thinner, like something dense had lifted, even if no one could say exactly what. The 4 p.m. no-agenda meetings weren't daily anymore. They didn't need to be. But people still showed up once or twice a week. Sometimes just to sit. Sometimes to share. Once, someone cried. Once, someone laughed so hard they dropped their smoothie. Once, Maria read a line from a poem she hadn't planned to share, and 3 of us sat in silence afterward, because there was nothing to add. And somehow, that silence felt like a form of applause. That same week, HR rolled out a new listening initiative. They called it Coffee and Clarity. There were sign-up sheets and smiley face surveys and a branded poster that made it feel more like a TED Talk than a trust exercise. It was well-intentioned. But safe. People went. People nodded. Then they left and still came to our 4 p.m. lounge. I don't say that to brag. It just made me realize something. There's a difference between being heard and being held. On Wednesday, I was asked to give a short talk at the end of quarter-staff meeting. Nothing formal. Just 5 minutes about team morale and cultural shifts. Mr. Thompson's idea. I wanted to say no. But I didn't. Because I had something to say. Or maybe something I needed to find out if I could say. I didn't prepare a slide deck. I didn't write it out. When the mic was handed to me, my hands were cold and my throat was dry, and I stood there for a second, looking at people I used to only nod at in elevators. Then I spoke. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I smiled, nervous, honest, when I sent that email. I was tired, frustrated, and careless. And I thought I was being funny, which makes it worse. But what I didn't expect after the embarrassment, and the guilt, and the cold sweat was that it would make people talk. I glanced around. Some people were watching. Some were staring into their coffee cups. What I've learned is, most of us are carrying something. Stress, doubt, pressure to be perfect, to seem together. We don't talk about it, because we don't want to seem weak. Or ungrateful. Or, too much. I paused. But the thing is, it's not too much. It's human. And if we don't name it, it just stays under the surface, making us harder, quieter, lonelier. Someone coughed. I smiled again, smaller now. I don't think I fixed anything, but I'm glad I made a mess big enough to open a door. Even just a crack. I looked at Mr. Thompson. He nodded once, tight-lipped. But there was something in his eyes that didn't feel like management. It felt like understanding, maybe even relief. I closed with, "That's it. Thanks for not firing me." People laughed. A few clapped. One person, I think from finance, gave me a thumbs up. I walked back to my seat, legs wobbly. And as I sat, Maria leaned over and whispered, "That was the least corporate thing I've ever seen in here." Good. That night, I went home and stared at my plant, Poppy, whose leaves were yellowing around the edges. I hadn't watered her in days. I filled a glass, poured slowly, then sat beside her like she was someone I owed more than I'd given. My phone buzzed. It was Danny. Mom told me about your dad's message. She cried. Quietly, but definitely cried. I texted back. I didn't know he could even type full sentences. She replied, "People surprise you when you stop waiting for them to fail." I stared at the screen, then typed, "How are you doing?" There was a long pause before she answered. "I'm tired too. But I don't know how to be vulnerable without sounding like I'm failing." "You don't." "You sure?" "No. But I'm tired of waiting to be sure before I say anything." She sent a heart emoji. No words. But it landed heavier than anything she could have written. I opened my notebook. Wrote, "Sometimes the apology you need is the one you give to yourself for being so quiet for so long." Then wrote, "I'm allowed to be seen." And underlined it. Twice. The next morning, I passed Mr. Thompson in the hall. We nodded. Then he paused. Turned. "Hey." "Yeah?" "That talk yesterday, you said something about carrying things. Things we don't say." He looked at me, then down at the folder in his hand. "I think I've been carrying more than I realized." A long pause. Then, "I'm figuring out what to do with that." I nodded. "That's a start." We didn't say anything else. Just walked in opposite directions. Not cold. Not distant. Just a pause between chapters. Later that day, Ethan came to my desk. He looked nervous. "Hey, I wanted to ask. Could I send out a calendar invite for another 4 p.m. session next week?" I blinked. "Of course." "Why?" He smiled, almost sheepish. "I've been working on something. Like, writing, about burnout. And what it does to your creativity. I thought maybe I'd read it. If that's okay." I nodded, more moved than I expected to be. That'd be more than okay. That night, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize at first. It was Mr. Thompson's personal. Just one line. "Thanks for starting something I didn't know we needed." I replied, "Thanks for not stopping it." And that was that. Nothing resolved. Nothing fixed. But something moved. And once something really moves, you can't pretend it didn't. Friday came like any other. No dramatic ending. No orchestral swell. Just the usual collection of pings, to-dos, and caffeine. But something had changed. Or maybe, more accurately, I had. The meetings felt less like theater. The greetings were slower. Eyes lingered a bit longer, as if people were checking in without asking. No one said, "You look tired." But someone said, "You look like you slept." Which might have been the kindest thing I'd heard in months. At 4 p.m., Ethan's session started. More people came than expected, some with laptops open, pretending to be busy. Others with notebooks, half hiding behind them. But most just came. Saturday. Waited. Ethan stood in front of the window. The afternoon light made his silhouette faint, like he was there and not there all at once. He cleared his throat. And began. What he read wasn't polished. It wasn't branded. It wasn't even titled. It was just true. He spoke about losing his sense of creativity when he felt unseen. About spending more energy fitting in than thinking well. About how burnout doesn't scream, it simmers. Quietly, till you mistake numbness for normal. No one interrupted. When he finished, he looked up, almost startled that we were still there. I started clapping. Not performatively, just because it deserved it. Others joined. Maria whistled. Ethan looked like he might cry, but didn't. Instead, he laughed. That was terrifying. "You didn't flinch once," I said. I flinched inside. We all do. Afterward, people lingered. More than usual. Someone brought out chocolate chip cookies. Someone else put on music, low, ambient, but warm. The lights stayed off a little longer than necessary, and no one seemed in a rush to get back to their inbox. Micah came up beside me. "You gonna miss this?" I frowned. "Miss what?" He shrugged. "This version of us. This moment." I looked around. "I don't think it's gone." I think it's just started. He nodded, slowly. You're staying, then? For now. He didn't press. Just bumped my shoulder, took a cookie, and walked away. Later that evening, I packed up slowly. The office emptied, but I stayed, sat by the window, watched the city shift from gold to blue to black. Mr. Thompson walked by on his way out. Hesitated. You still here? Just thinking. He nodded. Then, without looking at me. You made this a better place. I turned. He added, quietly. That's not nothing. Then he left. I didn't move. Didn't answer. Just let the sentence settle in the room like dust. I texted Danny that night. Told a room full of people today that burnout feels like losing your own voice. She wrote back. Sounds like you found it again. Then. Proud of you. Even if Dad never says it. I replied. I think he said it. Just in his way. She hearted the message. Then added. So, are you gonna write about all this? I stared at her message for a long time. Then opened a new document. Typed the title. Tofu by replying all. Paused. Deleted tofu. Typed instead. Things I meant. And hit save. That weekend, I had coffee with Ethan, Maria, and 2 others from our accidental little circle. It wasn't a debrief. It wasn't a follow-up. Just coffee. Ethan showed up with a notebook full of scribbles. Maria brought extra headphones in case someone needed to tune out. One person didn't say a word the whole time, just sipped tea and nodded at everything. It was perfect. Because no one had to be anything. We were just there. And that was enough. On Sunday, I went for a walk without my phone. No distractions. No pretending I was productive. Just me and the sidewalk and the little places you only notice when you're not scrolling. There was a bench with peeling paint. A crack in the pavement shaped like a question mark. A flyer for a missing cat that had clearly been found but never taken down. Everything imperfect. Everything still standing. I sat on the bench. Closed my eyes. And whispered. I'm still here. Not to anyone. Not for applause. Just to remember. That night, I opened the Things I Meant file for what I knew would be the last time in a while. Not because it was done. But because I didn't need it to hold everything anymore. I wrote one last thing. You don't have to finish strong. You just have to keep showing up softer. True or still willing. Then I saved it. Closed the laptop. And turned off the light. Not to sleep. Just to rest. Because the hard part wasn't saying the truth. It was staying soft after.